population or to become a majority Muslim population? What about your children's future? What about your grandchildren's future? The people of Europe have mostly been aborting their babies, and now with Europe aborting their own futures. Muslims are talking about Arabia. They're talking about Londonistan. Europe will lose its freedom. It will lose its civilization. What we are seeing is Europe is going from a Christian to a secular, from a secular to a Muslim in the future. Europe must be brought back to Christ. And I believe we've got to put a clear message for Europe. It's Reformation or it's Islamization. It is good to be in Holland, in the Netherlands. We have a great debt to the Netherlands. It was the Netherlands that first sent out Jan van Riebeeck, the first governor of the Cape, 1652, which was just 4 years after Holland had achieved its full independence from Spain, from Spanish oppression in 1648. So just 4 years later, Jan van Riebeeck landed in the Cape, and one of his very first acts was to kneel in Table Bay in front of the imposing Table Mountain and to pray that this outpost would be for the spreading of the light of the Reformed faith throughout the continent of Africa. Our city was founded in prayer with a missionary commitment to fulfill the Great Commission throughout Africa, and we, praise God, our mission has its headquarters in Cape Town, and we are working throughout Africa as far as Nigeria and Sudan. In South Africa, the House of Orange is greatly honored and respected, and we have in South Africa our greatest river is named the Orange River, after the Prince of Orange. One of our provinces is called the Orange Free State, in honor of the Prince of Orange. Our old South African flag had the orange, white and blue, Oranje, blauwe, blood. Afrika Christus comes from the Africa Institute founded by Andrew Murray. Andrew Murray, one of the greatest and most respected theologians in South Africa's history. He came from Scottish missionaries who came to the Cape in order to provide ministers, because the British would no longer allow ministers to come from Holland. However, although he got his main theological training first in Scotland, he came over and studied also in the Netherlands to perfect his Dutch, and he then went on and began magnificent work in South Africa, out of which we were blessed with the 1860 revival and great missionary movements that went from there. Andrew Murray's slogan was Africa for Christ. Our mission, Frontline Fellowship, has been going now for 30 years. We started in a military base. Our vision was to win soldiers to Christ. Our vision was to go to the frontline states, behind enemy lines, to help persecuted churches. From the very beginning, I have had a focus on the Islamic world, the Muslim world, with a great desire to reach Muslims for Christ and soldiers in the conflict zones. The challenge that I want to bring before you today is Reformation or Islamization. That is the choice before us. The greatest threat to the church, the greatest threat to Europe, the greatest threat to civilization worldwide today is Islam. Now, why am I so concerned? One of our greatest areas that we've been working is Sudan. Sudan, the churches have come under fire. We have been bombarded multiple times. I have preached over 1,200 times in Sudan. I do not believe I've ever preached in a church in Sudan that had not been bombed by the Muslim government at least once, sometimes 10 times, once 18 times in the last 12 months, one congregation. In Sudan, the Muslims are operating on scorched earth in the Nuba Mountains, where they are burning out the villages and attacking the people. The people are being forced to defend themselves. Where do the rebels get their weapons from in the Nuba Mountains? From the enemy. The enemy is my quartermaster, they say. And you can recognize immediately these weapons are from Red China, Soviet bloc type of weapons. Communist China provides most of the weapons to the Arab government of Sudan in exchange for oil. And the resistance movements are capturing these weapons from the Arabs and using them to try and achieve their freedom. It is very dangerous flying behind enemy lines and landing on these rough airstrips way behind the lines in Muslim-controlled Nuba Mountains. We have to fly sometimes 3.5, 4 hours flying time behind the lines to reach this island of Christianity in the Sea of Islam in the River Mountains, where there are Christians dating back even to the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Smuggling in Bibles. By God's grace, our mission, Frontline Fellowship, has smuggled over 300,000 Bibles and Christian books in over 24 languages into Sudan alone. Even helping with Bible translation projects and providing the first Bible that people have ever had in their languages. In Isaiah 18, it speaks of beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, a tall people, a smooth-skinned people, a people of strange speech, a warlike people, will bring offerings to God. A trumpet will sound, all the world will see as a banner is raised on the mountains. And there you see the Christian banner, the flag representing the cross of Christ, is flying on the mountains of Sudan. Many times, while we might go in by plane, we end up traveling by bicycle or by dugout canoes or by foot. And we have many times sought to put wheels under the word by bringing bicycles and Bibles and equipping the evangelist with audiovisual equipment, tough, dust-proof, hand-cranked or solar panel-powered audiovisual materials, MP3 recorders, tape recorders, video projectors, VCD kits, all kinds of tools to evangelize people who in many cases are not literate. We trained the first 70 chaplains of the SPLA, the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, the resistance fighters in Sudan, in order to be able to disciple and evangelize the soldiers in the front lines, which is the first vision of our mission, Frontline Fellowship, to reach soldiers for Christ. Because much of Africa is in a war situation, and in most of the cases we found there were no organized chaplaincy works amongst the fighters. And it is so important that soldiers hear the gospel. This is important for several reasons. Firstly, because they have a very good chance of meeting God soon, and their eternal destiny is at stake. But secondly, a soldier can easily commit horrible atrocities unless his heart is changed by the gospel of Christ, by the Holy Spirit, and his conduct is informed by the Word of God, and he is taught and discipled. And then the soldier can be a good influence instead of one of the causes of grief for the civilians. And so this has been for us a very high priority, getting Bibles into their hands and training chaplains to evangelize and disciple the soldiers. Now, recently there's been the funeral in England for Margaret Thatcher, and I myself have a personal debt of gratitude to the Iron Lady of England, because back in October 1987, I and 3 other frontline missionaries, we were captured in what was then socialist Zambia under Kenneth Kahunda's dictatorship, and it was Margaret Thatcher as the Prime Minister of England who personally stood up and secured our release. Zambia is a Central African country. It used to be Northern Rhodesia. I was brought up in Southern Rhodesia, what today is Zimbabwe. And so Zambia and Rhodesia used to in fact be federated. There was a Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, Federation of Central African Republic, along with Malawi. Well, I was a prisoner in Zambia. When we talk about prisons, you cannot think of what you think of as prisons, because I think most of the prisons in Europe today would resemble for us a very high standard of hotel. But the prisons in Africa where we were imprisoned, you could not begin to comprehend how bad they were. I was in Lusaka Central Prison. We refused to pay bribes to the border officials, and we were arrested and put into prison cells that were 15 feet by 25 feet. And there were 60 to 65 prisoners in a cell. There were no beds, no bunks, no furnishings, no sheets, no pillows, nothing resembling sanitation, no plumbing, no electricity. We were crammed in very much like this. And I was put in these filthy, disease-ridden cells that were just, and people who had no access to soap or shower facilities. You can just imagine the vermin, the dirt, the disease. There weren't too many rats, because rats got quickly cooked and eaten by the prisoners, you can imagine. But interrogated in many ways. Now, friends of ours ensured that the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was informed of our plight just before her departure to the Commonwealth Conference in Vancouver. Although I am a South African citizen and I was born and brought up in Africa, my father fought in the British Army in the Second World War in North Africa, and for that reason I have the privilege of a British passport as well, even though I have never lived in England. And so, because of my father's war record and my British citizenship, I became a British problem while I was locked up in Zambia. So as the Commonwealth countries gathered, and they were gathering in 1987 with one major concern. You remember the only thing that united the Commonwealth ever, it seems, was the hatred for South Africa and Rhodesia before. And the biggest issue in the 80s was sanctions on South Africa, disinvestment on South Africa, pull all the companies out, destroy South Africa. You'd recall there was a lot of hatred for our country in that time, and for us that was quite strange because, you know, when South Africa was attacked by the British in the Anglo-Boer War, it was your Queen Wilhelmina who sent out a battleship to bring Paul, Uncle Paul, the president of the South African Republic, Paul Kruger, in defiance of the British naval blockade. It was very brave of the Dutch Queen, very much a young person. I think she was only a teenager at the time. But she ordered the Dutch warship to go and bring Paul Kruger through the British naval blockade in defiance of them to Holland, to a wonderful reception, and with great honour the South African president was received by all the heads of state of Europe. In fact, I've been to the Kruger House in South Africa a few times, and you can see the awards given by the Tsar of Russia and by the Emperor of the Austrian Empire and by the Kaiser of Germany and by the Dutch and the Belgian royal families and from the French government and every government in Europe, it seems, except the British. All of Europe was united in support of the Boer people in the just fight against the British invasion, the imperial attacks. And yet, within just 60 years, South Africa went from being a favourite in Europe to being the most hated and despised, not allowed to take part in the Olympics, not allowed to take part in the Paralympics Olympics. Countries with exemplary human rights records like Red China, and Cuba, North Korea, Soviet Union, they could take part, but Rhodesia and South Africa were boycotted, disinvested, hated, even while we were being attacked by terrorists, which for us was strange, because our people had fought in the First World War and the Second World War on the side of our allies. But when we were attacked, our friends, our kith and kin, our brethren in Europe, in Holland, in Germany, in Britain, took the sides of the communist terrorists who were putting car bombs in our streets. Now, people are justly offended and outraged by the terrorist attacks in Boston recently at the marathon. In fact, my daughter just came back from Boston. She came back the day that from Boston that the bombing went off. She had been representing our country in international ice skating. The World Ice Skating Tournament was there. They could have as easily been the target. We feel for the people of Boston, but the ANC terrorists, who today are the government of our country, they had scores of car bombs like that in Church Street in Pretoria, all over the country, many, many car bombs, many terrorist attacks. They killed tens of thousands of civilians in South Africa in around, and yet they were getting funded by the Dutch government, funded by the European Union, funded by the British, by the United Nations, by the Americans, and supported by the World Council of Churches. And so, to us it seems like hypocrisy, how people can condemn terrorism from one group and yet have supported terrorism from other groups. But that's getting away from the point. Margaret Thatcher was being targeted because she was the most vocal opponent of sanctions on South Africa. And the man who was the leader of the pack, the leader of the gang in the Commonwealth that were ganging up on England for refusing to put sanctions on South Africa was Kenneth Kaunda, whose prisoner we were. We were the presidential detainees without charge of Kenneth Kaunda, the president or unelected dictator of Zambia. And he was outraged because Britain refused to place economic sanctions on South Africa. So Margaret Thatcher responded by asking, why did Zambia herself not place sanctions on South Africa? And Kenneth Kaunda responded, that would place many Zambians out of work. Exactly, replied the British Prime Minister. And as South Africa is one of our most important trading partners, many British citizens would be placed out of work if we were to impose sanctions on South Africa. Quite aside from many South Africans themselves who would be placed out of work, of course. She went on to relate how Zambians were dependent on South Africa for the mealies, the maize grown in the Orange Free State. How Zambian Airways was maintained by South African Airways, how Zambian Railways was maintained by South African Railways, how the South African veterinarians cared for their animals and their cattle, and how many Zambians were migrant workers in Zambia, in South Africa, and how many hundreds of millions of pounds a year went to the Zambian coffers from these migrant workers' salaries and taxes. Kenneth Kaunda then replied that because of South Africa's human rights abuses, Britain should impose sanctions on South Africa. It was at this point that Margaret Thatcher produced our information. Who are you to speak about human rights? You are the unelected dictator of a one-party dictatorship. There are 4 British missionaries being held without trial as presidential detainees in Lusaka Central Prison. They've been tortured and abused by your own security forces. How dare you talk about human rights abuses? And Margaret Thatcher, in an eloquent and brilliant way, demolished Kaunda so that he was speechless. He was dumbstruck. When he came back from the Vancouver Commonwealth Conference in 1987, his first words as he got off the steps, I am told by his own assistant, was, "Get these missionaries out of here." And so we were set free. By the way, this is the Freedom Monument in Lusaka. I found it very interesting that the Freedom Monument is behind bars. There's something in that. Well, one of the people we met while in prison, in Lusaka Central Prison, was General Godfrey Miyanda. Now, General Godfrey Miyanda had been imprisoned for saying that sanctions would hurt Zambia more than South Africa. And for that, this general was placed into prison. I met a lot of people in prison who were presidential detainees for all kinds of reasons. Most of the people in that prison had absolutely no trial. They'd never had their day in court. You could tell this because if you were a remand prisoner, you wore civilian clothes. If you were a convicted prisoner, you wore prison uniform. Most of the prisoners were still in their civilian clothes. Some had been there 8 years and they'd never had their day in court. Not only that, there was a man there, an Indian man, a Hindu, who had been in prison simply because the government wanted his mine. They confiscated his mine and they put him in prison. There were so many injustices in this prison, but that would get me off the topic. Well, General Godfrey Miyanda became one of our friends, and he became, when Zambia overthrew the socialist dictatorship of Kenneth Kaunda, they committed this country to Christ. The 31st of October, Reformation Day, 1991, Zambia was freed from Kenneth Kaunda's one-party socialist dictatorship in the first free elections that they had experienced since independence. And 27 years of Kaunda's socialist humanist reign was ended. The president, Frederick Chiluba, who had also been in the same prison I'd been, not that we met there because he was in another cell, but Frederick Chiluba committed the country to Christ. He repented for the sins of socialism, corruption, animism, witchcraft, and Zambia banned abortion, banned pornography, brought the Bible and prayer back in schools. Many great things took place under the changes that took place in 1991. And for 20 years, Zambia was run according to generally Christian principles. We were invited to teach people in the country on biblical principles. I, in fact, produced the Biblical Principles of Africa book because Frederick Chiluba challenged me when I brought him a whole pile of good books. He said, "I love books. I love reading. But the demands of office give me very little time for reading. Don't you have a small book that summarizes all of these?" And so I was challenged to write Biblical Principles for Africa, which went through several editions, and we ended up translating it into different languages because of its demands, and it has gone as all far and wide, Congo, all over Africa. There are leaders in Africa that have endorsed this book, including President Levi Mwanawasa and the President also of Zambia and Malawi. They put the endorsements, and those are at the back of the book now. We were invited to teach training colleges to train some of the teachers who are in preparation. Biblical worldview seminars, helping the people to understand the times, Bible translations and different writing projects. Radio programs, on state radio, getting into their Bible colleges, teacher training colleges, seminaries. It's been a wonderful opportunity. When my son was just 7 years old, our youngest son Calvin, he came up to Zambia and helped me in ministering to people because he has been trained since he's very small, as all my children have, in evangelism, explosion, way of the master, and he could, from the time he was 5, give it word for word, perfect presentations, and did so on national television in Zambia and at seminars and conferences. I thought it was important for them to not just see me teach about reforming the family, but to see it from a little child. Because in many African countries, they despise the youth to the point of they've got nothing to contribute, and the fathers are not involved in discipling their children. And so it was important to show them the fathers must spend time giving Bible memorization for the children, caring for the family. This man's got a wonderful testimony too. General Ronnie Shikapashwa. He was the head of the Zambian Air Force. He was crippled in a car accident. He was told by the doctors he would never walk again. But his wife came to Christ. She challenged him. He came to Christ. He was healed. He became Minister of Information, Minister of Internal Affairs, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And he became someone that we visited regularly in Zambia. He arranged for us to meet the president at the time, President Levi Mwanawasa. And President Mwanawasa, at that stage, was not a dedicated Christian. He, in fact, came from a Jehovah's Witness background, and he was not involved in any church attempts because Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, do not even support anyone involved in politics. We shared with him the gospel. He committed his life to Christ. He was baptized in the local Baptist church, and we saw some wonderful things take place as a result. In Zambia, we've been able to see whole schools trained, but most of our work has been in Sudan in recent years. We've planted 100 schools, primary schools in Zambia, and a high school. We have trained hundreds of pastors, and we have entrusted them Reformation study Bibles, and we continually are working for Reformation. From Frontline Fellowship has grown the Reformation Society and Africa Christian Action. And we call our people back to our Christian heritage. We have National Days of Repentance. We celebrate Reformation Day. We are continuing to have leadership training, to bring the people back to Christ. We run Great Commission courses. Here we had almost 2,000 people in Nairobi gathered for a Great Commission conference. Hundreds committing themselves to a Great Commission lifestyle of seeking to fulfill the Great Commission in their countries. We're inspired by one of the greatest missionaries of all time, Dr. David Livingstone. Our mission headquarters is called Livingstone House. I am the chairman of the Livingstone Fellowship. This year is the 200th anniversary of the birth of Dr. David Livingstone. And so we are mobilizing ministry all over Africa in honor of Livingstone's bicentennial. I have a team on a 7-month, 11-country mission across Africa where they're following in the footsteps of David Livingstone, ministering and also recording for In the Footsteps of David Livingstone DVD documentary to show the spiritual fruit that abides now 140 years after David Livingstone sowed the gospel seed in these countries of Zambia and Mozambique and Malawi and Zimbabwe, just wonderful Tanzania. And so all of these areas, Burundi, they'll be going to, and we're sowing hundreds of great Christian books, in fact tens of thousands of Bible books in these areas. We see it so important as we live in an age of guilt manipulation, where our great Christian heritage is being demeaned. And all over Europe and America in particular, we see Christians cowered into apologizing for the great Christians of the past and apologizing for being white Anglo-Saxon male Protestants, wasps. I remember first being accused of being a wasp at one of these international conferences. What's a wasp? Isn't that an insect? No, it's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But I was worse than that, I was a male. In fact, a heterosexual male. I mean, how bad can you get? Without AIDS. I mean, this is as bad as it gets. And so I thought for a moment, I said, the fact that I'm white and male and Anglo-Saxon is not my own choosing, this is God's doing. I think you must take it up with God. The only thing I can take responsibility for is being a Protestant. But as I've come to understand the Reformation teachings of predestination and of the sovereignty of God, I don't think I can even take responsibility for the fact that I'm a Protestant, because it looks to me that God chose me, I didn't choose him. So it isn't even that I can say I chose God. He's the one who reached out and put faith and hope and life in my heart and repentance. So what am I to repent for? For how God made me? The important thing is, what am I doing? I've dedicated my life to serving black Christians and bringing black people to Christ, and even bringing our enemies, the Muslims, to Christ. And now I must apologize and repent? Yes, for what your ancestors did. What did my ancestors do? I know that my ancestors came to Africa to build up Africa, to bring civilization to Africa, to help the people there, to increase their life expectancy, to plant hospitals and schools and law courts and build bridges. And is this something terrible? But we see in the West, people are so ignorant of their history that they now want to apologize to the Muslims who hate us and are persecuting the church. And we are seeing people who are being beaten into guilt manipulation that they will actually reject their Christian heritage. And so as we've been involved in evangelism amongst Muslims and communists, we've seen it necessary to go back into our own history and to understand the heroes of the faith and understand, were these people as bad as they say? And as we've discovered the truth about the missionaries of the past, like David Livingstone and C.T. Studd and Mary Slessor and Hudson Taylor and Robert Moffat and all these great heroes of faith and the reformers, we found, in fact, the situation is the exact reverse of what the Marxist historians are telling us. So we've seen it important to give teachings on the heroes of the faith and teachings on also our Christian heritage, that people can understand the times that we live in, understand the past, and be inspired by these examples of excellence in the past in order to work for a better future, for reformation and revival. Which brings me to the key point. Europe has a tremendous heritage of faith. What a great heritage. When I come to Europe and I see the statues and the cathedrals and the monuments, and I think of the wonderful privilege you have to be brought up around all this history. I have around my office in our mission hallway, it's the Reformers hallway, we have original oil paintings done by staff members, oil on canvas of the Reformers. And I've got on one side of my door Ulrich Zwingli, on the other side John Calvin, and facing us John Wycliffe, and we've got Martin Luther and the great heroes of the faith. And we've organized in South Africa great Reformation events such as the Calvin 500. And we were pushing this years before anyone in America got interested in it, to honor the 500th anniversary of the birth of John Calvin in 2009. Now we're working for a great Reformation 500 movement as we approach the 500th anniversary of the launching of the Reformation by Dr. Martin Luther, 31st October 1517. And so we are seeing this importance to get back to our spiritual roots in order to give people perspective and hope and inspiration for the future.